Thank you, Will. Thank you for all your efforts, all your hard work. Thank you, Portland team, for what's going to be an incredible conference. If this is your first conference, or if you're a founding member, welcome to the AORE Annual Conference. If you're just starting your career, or if you're just finishing it and retiring it, welcome to the AORE Annual Conference. Every year, there's something for everyone here, and we hope that you find your place in the next couple days. And we hope you find inspiration, build networks, and help us further the profession of outdoor recreation education. It's so great to see friends, new friends, old friends, people coming back who have gone away, past conference hosts, future conference hosts out in the audience, things like that. Welcome to AORE. I want to thank, again, Portland's team. I want to thank Hannah Cooley at the national office, who I'm sure is working back outside. A little round of applause, or a big round of applause for Hannah. I'd also like to thank Event Guard, and they're probably running around, or, oh, they're actually right there. I see two of them. So Aaron and Ashley, and Callie is somewhere around the corner probably. So round of applause for Event Guard. And quite honestly, I'd like to thank all of you. I want to thank all of you for helping me serve the profession and serve the membership and moving this great ship forward. So thank you for everyone. We have a lot of things to celebrate with the association, and you're going to hear a lot of those stories over the coming days, in the weeks, and the months moving forward. We all grow and benefit as a result of the increasing strength of AORE. Some of these strengths, we've increased our membership dramatically. You'll hear about that in the coming days. We've increased the offerings through the national office, and we're increasing our presence on a national stage, which will further affect the positive effects that you're doing in your member programs. This last year in regard to membership, you'll see some of the numbers at the annual report and at the town halls, but we have a healthy and vibrant and growing membership. And one of the things I wanted to celebrate with you is how we are better serving the members, especially those student members. We'd made a transition last year, and we divided our membership between student supporters and student professionals. And I'm here to celebrate that it's been going off the hook, and there's over 140 student professional members in this room. Young professionals, yeah, round of applause for them. Those student professionals are going to be the future directors, the future leaders of programs moving forward, and so we're going to invest the time, energy, and resources to elevate them to great levels. We have also increasing benefits for our member programs, and so if you've joined the association past July 1, you've received a whole kind of a new suite of services of member benefits for each level, and we have that underway right now. We're very excited about it. And increasing tools and resources for your success. Two of them, and actually Stacy is pointing out, actually AORE is an organization member of itself, if you can tell from the banner up here, which is kind of like pretty awkward. But all new organization members, so if you join the association past July 1, please go visit the national office desk, and you'll be getting one of these banners to bring back to your facility and show your support of the profession and of the industry. So please help me in celebrating that, those who are investing at that highest level to elevate outdoor rec and ed. So round of applause for all the new organization members as well. Another tool I'd like to share with you is a pilot tool, and we're actually going to be creating these pamphlets, e-booklets, and a hard copy of listserv responses based on codifying a body of knowledge for this association. So we've got a template for you to come look at the national office. This one happens to be on climbing wall and challenge courses. We also have ones for risk management and other area programs. So all the responses from the listserv for the last 3 or 4 years are culminating into these booklets, and we'll be producing them annually. So another resource is so you can tap in there, what kind of wall should I build, what type of shoes should I buy, what type of backpacks. You can go and see the responses, but you can kind of have a hard copy, so we're pretty excited about that as well. Increasing offerings across the United States. So the AORE has been a little bit everywhere this year. We've been to Washington, D.C., we've been to Boulder, Colorado, Richmond, Virginia, Portland a couple times. We'll be in Boston next week. So we are increasing programs, offering workshops and seminars, furthering the word and doing some more geographic things, and we're hoping that you're tapping into those things. We released the Outdoor Insider this last year. So we have an e-magazine, and hopefully many of you have seen that and are celebrating that. So linking our member programs with the products, the certifications and trainings, and sending them out to our friends at American Canoe Association and International Mountain Biking Association. So helping them see what we do as a profession. Also want to talk about a certification training tool. We're in the process of developing this working tool where you can enter in what type of certifications you have, and it will quantify the dollars that you're putting into them, the days that are required to be out of the field, and then the actual real costs. So you can actually work with your supervisors to articulate what your needs are for professional development funding and what you need to be successful. It's a pilot program that we're working on right now. We should have off the presses pretty soon. And last but not least, we're increasing our influence on a national level. We've been to Washington, D.C. walking the halls of the Senate and talking about how can we improve the access to public lands for member programs. As a result of that, AORE has joined an outdoor access working group. So AORE is a stakeholder member, one of 10, who has a representative voice of college, university, and military programs. And we're very excited about that work, and you'll be hearing more about that on Friday with the access programs. So AORE is killing it. So round of applause for AORE. I'm so glad you're doing it. But you're here now to hear Stacy Bear. And I noticed when you all went to go sit at your tables, no one came and sat next to Stacy. Now you probably were under the 6'2" requirement for the table here. If you haven't noticed, Stacy is a diminutive man, kind of delicate, just like me. When we stand next to each other, you'll kind of see it's almost like a flag football team. But Stacy Bear, let me introduce Stacy. Very proud to have him here. Stacy Bear, a climber, mountaineer, and skier, is also a veteran of Iraq and the director of Sierra Club Outdoors. Time outside after Iraq led to Stacy's recovery from post-traumatic stress and adjustment issues following his year in Baghdad as a civil affairs team leader. Prior to Iraq, Stacy was an explosive ordnance disposal technician in the former Soviet state of Georgia and Angola. He also served as the counterterrorism team chief for the U.S. National Intelligence Center in Sarajevo, Bosnia. Stacy received the Bronze Star of Merit for his actions in Baghdad. It was named one of National Geographic's Adventure of the Year for 2014 and is the 2011 recipient of the James Wilcox Spirit in Climbing Award. Under his leadership, Sierra Club Outdoors has been named the 2013 Nonprofit of the Year and the 2013 President Council of Fitness Community Leader. He is a brand champion for the North Face and also has degrees from the University of Mississippi in Pennsylvania and makes his home with his wife in Salt Lake City. So please help me welcome Stacy Bear to the stage for our keynote presentation.
I stole Jeanette's water because I didn't want to reach over and grab that one. I also hope everybody's appreciated the fact that I really messed up on the PowerPoint presentation, and you've been able to see my mistake all morning long, which is really fantastic. I also think it's great, the finance meeting Friday at 7:30 in the morning. For those of you not at the fun run, I'm sure you'll be at the finance meeting. Unfortunately, I won't be here for that. It's really awesome to be here. It's great to know that I'm speaking in front of the largest AORE group ever. Thanks for that heads up, Jeanette. And it's also really great to speak to you all early in the morning on the first day of a conference about the outdoors, and yet again, an outdoor conference that happens indoors. My goal is to really fire you guys up and gals today for the rest of the conference so that when you come home and you get back from Portland and you fling the doors back open of your programs, flocks and flocks of people on your campuses, your communities, and on your military bases come stampeding in. And I got to be honest, if we're doing our job right, excuse me, if we're doing our job right, if we're building that legacy of what it means to do outdoor recreation, the people that should be coming into your doors when you come home and in the next 4 to 5 years need to look a lot different than the people in this room. This room needs to grow. And as this room grows, it needs to look a lot less like a Patagonia catalog and a lot more like the rest of this country. There might be people of color, folks who might identify as being physically disabled or mentally injured. There should be an equal portion of men and women, boys and girls, straights and gays, lesbians, transgenders, and veterans. And they're all going to be asking you how they can get outside. And you need to be able to respond. The other thing is, it probably means that a lot of the people coming through your doors are not going to be wearing plaid. I got into the outdoors as an adult because one of my buddies who I had served with in Iraq thought it might be an opportunity for me to get up and out of the depression and suicidal thoughts that were swamping my mind at the time. Sure, I had a background in the outdoors. I had been a Boy Scout. I'd spent a few weekends in college, but I honestly wasn't cool enough for the outdoors crew at the University of Mississippi. And even a 2-week surf trip in South Africa when I came home from Iraq, and I honestly believe that that trip helped me stay alive long enough until the first time I got vertical and out on the rock face on the first Flatiron in Boulder, Colorado. But when I was out there, I found a new passion on that rock. And I've been lucky enough to turn that passion into a career advocating, fundraising for, inspiring, and leading all sorts of people into the great outdoors. It really hasn't been so much as a dream come true as it is a dream that I just get to keep dreaming, and I haven't woken up yet. And that's what your profession is in many ways. You're the dream makers. And you know, coming from my background in uniformed service, it was immediately important to me that I reach out to all the veterans that I knew, and I wanted to make sure that they could participate. And that meant right away that I was looking at both adaptive programming for physical and mental health injuries. And as a veteran, thanks to the many teams that I've been lucky enough to be a part of and had the opportunity to lead, it also meant that right away I was seeking out, without even knowing it, an ethnically diverse and gender-inclusive group of folks. It wasn't, however, for several years that I really realized the importance of ensuring the groups we were going outdoors didn't all look, think, or act like me. But as soon as I had that realization, I've come up with 2 guiding posts that have helped me out over the last couple of years. And I think maybe they're already guiding posts for you, but I really hope that if they're not, you can begin to think of these as kind of 2 large pillars on a framework. The first is, everyone is an adaptive athlete. Everyone in this room is an adaptive athlete. If you put shoes on in the morning, you're adapting your feet to better deal with the conditions you will encounter that day. Now, different activities, of course, require different levels of adaptation. You're probably not going to huck a 10-foot cliff on a pair of cross-country skis. It's not the right setup. You may not ski with a traditional 2-ski and 2-pole setup because maybe you don't have your legs. Does that mean you shouldn't ski? No. It just means you need a different sort of adaptive equipment. The second pillar is that everyone has challenges in life. Whether or not those challenges manifest themselves as trauma and ultimately as post-traumatic stress disorder, adjustment disorder, depression, alcoholism, or addiction, doesn't matter. The reality is that everyone has a challenge in their life. Everybody has dark days. It doesn't matter who you are, veteran, non-veteran, man, woman. Everyone receives the healing power of the outdoors, simply for being outdoors. And we'll talk a little bit more later about the fact that what you're doing isn't a lavish expenditure, as the president of your board noted. It's not an amenity. It's an absolute must-have. Now, before we keep going, and in between coffee gulps or Twitter feeds that you're looking on or thinking about how you would rather not be listening to me this morning, hoping that I ultimately make a relevant point for you, I want to let you guys know that I spent about 4 years in the South at the University of Mississippi, and I spent a lot of time in a church where the congregation talks back to the person who's standing up front. So at any point, feel free to raise your hands in the air, say amen, speak back to me as we're going through this. It's going to make it a lot easier for everybody, and it's going to help keep everyone awake. So there's a couple things, here's looking at you, Casey. There's a couple things that you guys can shout and answer or just think through these things. Some questions that I hope to touch on throughout the day, but that you're also going to be thinking about, I think, for the next few days. And the first is, why do students get involved with your programs? All right. What barriers exist for you to create more inclusive or adaptive programming? Okay. How do you define inclusive programming? It's probably more than a one-word answer. You don't need to shout out a large sentence or paragraph. How about adaptive recreation? Then again, what barriers exist for you to create more inclusive or adaptive programming? And finally, how do you define your jobs to your friends and your family? I'm going to let those sit, but I want to start with the 6th question first, which is, how do you define your job to your friends or your family? Some of my friends and family, perhaps not so jokingly, refer to me as a professional recess leader. They're pretty happy, I think, that I've found something I'm passionate about. And most of my family and a lot of my friends are pretty active in the outdoors. I've got people who are hunters all the way to hikers, climbers, and everything in between. But I think they're somewhat surprised that I've been able to turn a dream about climbing and skiing into a career. And I think honestly that they're a little bit jealous, and but at the same time, they don't really understand how little climbing and skiing that I think I do compared to what I think I ought to be doing in my position. Which is, right? There we go, somebody's getting into it, I appreciate it. Which is why I won't be at the finance meeting, but instead looking for the 3 inches of fresh powder that's evidently supposed to fall onto the mud come Friday morning. But thinking about what I do in work is always a complicated matter, right? Whenever you're filling out something and it says, what is your profession? There's nothing in there that ever says outdoor recreation specialist, right? I mean, there's different things. You might see a nonprofit administrator, an educator. You may see public health, a doctor, nurse, or technician. Sometimes you see environmental services, but typically that means something like logging, mining, or hydrology. You might see building services, community development, architecture, landscape, city planning. And the reality is that you could probably check all of those. Maybe the exception of environmental services. I don't know how many of you are actively promoting logging or mining in your programs. If you are, I'm with the Sierra Club. There's some other Sierra Clubbers here. We'd love to talk to you afterwards. But I think it'd be a lot easier if there was just a box that said outdoor recreation that kind of assumed all of the things that you do, because you do all of those things. More likely, however, I really do believe because of the crush of students and community members coming into your programs, the fairly limited resources that you guys have because you are seen as a lavish expenditure, and because of who you're serving, that maybe there should just be a superhero box and you guys can all check that and get on with your day. But I want to start with public health professionals. And I want you to begin thinking of yourselves as public health professionals. So the Clinton Health Matters Initiative, one of the leading conveners and think tanks right now in public health in the world, has this to say about what they're trying to do, which is to improve the health and well-being of all people by activating individuals, communities, and organizations to make meaningful contributions to the health of others. The goals are to reduce the prevalence of preventable health outcomes, alleviate health inequities and disparities, and reduce healthcare costs by improving access to key health resources for all people. That is what you do every single day. All right. Hopefully there would have been more amens on that point, but I get it. I get it. I met one person who went to Vanderbilt, which is sometimes considered a Southern school. She's now at Clemson, but is there anybody in here from the University of Mississippi? Yeah, right on. Anybody in here from Mississippi State? Also, right on. You guys are doing foundational, fundamental public health work every single day, and it lays the framework for an active, healthy, empathetic, critically thinking, service-driven citizenry. To describe yourselves as anything less is a disservice to the work that you're doing. And again, we absolutely have to stop thinking as what we do as a luxury or a nice to have, something you can do if you have the time or the expenses. And you've got to recognize that what you do, and not just connecting people to the outdoors, because oftentimes there are people who are receiving benefit from your programs that you'll never see because they're inspired by the work you do and the students and the community members coming through your door, that what you're doing is an absolute essential to human health. Kicking ass outside is the #1 public health requirement, I think, as we have going forward. And at different times in this country, what I'm talking about wasn't so far-fetched. In the early 20th century, naturalists would be mobbed when they went out into public. Harvard and Yale considered moving their entire classrooms outdoors. It basically would have looked like an outward-bound base camp. You come in, you get a little bit of foundational knowledge, and then you go out and then you test it in the outdoors. Think about how different our world would be if that would have continued on. You may know that this year we're also celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act, right? I love, I'm trying to pump you guys up. I'm like, you're superheroes, you're public health professionals. Everybody's quiet. The legislation is what gets everybody really going. What's amazing about this is that there were no dissenting votes in all of the Senate on the Wilderness Act, and only 7 in the House. Imagine what a bill would have to look like today to get that kind of bipartisan support for a program that is essentially leaving land alone and nobody can profit from. We have fallen a long, long way, I think, in the last 50 years, but we have, and really you have, an opportunity to bring us back. There's mounting research. AORE has been a big part of that over the last 10 years. And I'm lucky to be a part of a couple of different research efforts and projects that are showing what happens to the body and mind when you get outdoors in a way that has never been done before. We do too much and we rely too much sometimes on anecdotal and observable data and not enough on the hard scientific facts. But if you are representative of a Bay Area school or organization or a VA or a community in the San Francisco and Oakland Bay Area or military outreach programs, please, please do see me afterwards. We'd love to get you involved in some of the research. And Josh Brandon, who's one of my colleagues, I believe, is also here today. Josh, if you are here and want to raise your hand. Okay, Josh has slept in. That's great to know. He works for me, but that's cool. Anyway, Josh can talk to you about some of the other research that we're doing. But the anecdotal evidence, the narrative, the story of what we do is incredibly important. And I think one of the things we don't often do is connect that narrative back to the historic narrative of what we do. The Spartans walked home from war. All three major monotheistic Western religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, have key central figures who spent time in the wilderness before they went about their mission. And I think that speaks to what we do at a very core level. Even for those of you who may remember Adam and Eve, they didn't live in town. They didn't work in a cubicle farm. Maybe they did after they got kicked out of Eden. And they probably also didn't attend a lot of conferences. But so there is real historic evidence for what we're doing is the right thing. And you know, in my own life, I've also had the incredible power of nature, and I think everybody else would agree to that in this room. First through climbing, later on through mountaineering and skiing, and it's helped me move from some really, really dark times. I'm 3.5 years sober. I was suicidal. I was depressed. Thanks. And most days, not every day, but most days, I'm pretty excited about waking up, and it's because of nature. Adam Alter, a couple years ago in the Atlantic, had this to report. People who are exposed to natural scenes aren't just happier or more comfortable. The very building blocks of their physiological well-being respond positively. These results are surprising because the effects are so large, much larger than the effects of many other targeted treatment interventions. Meaning that just looking at pictures of nature is shown to be more powerful than other treatments, psychotherapy, medical intervention. And that's just looking at pictures of forests. Think about what you do and what benefit that has on everybody. So if the research is to believed, and if the research is to be believed, and I certainly think it is, you've got to believe that it transfers your work solidly into the realm of public health. And it gives us another argument, perhaps I think one of the strongest, for lands conservation that we have. And that is that our public lands, our conserved lands, are the largest public health system that this country has. You wouldn't smoke in a hospital room, so why would you frack in the cafeteria? Now, I was really hoping for an amen there, but I mean, that's really cool around the conservation method. But the thing is, it also creates a really strong incentive to make sure that your cities and towns have thriving park systems, that they're accessible to all people, and that as we build out our new cities, we do so with a strong emphasis on nature, and it starts with your campuses. A lot of your students, a lot of your community members, a lot of the people that you're serving, however, may or may not be motivated by public health. They may not be motivated by the fact that they need a health intervention. And if your students are anything like I was, they may not do something just because it's good for me. After 18 years away from my parents, it's only the last couple of years that I've actually began to brushing my teeth again at night. So if that's my challenge, think of the challenge for your students. We're not always motivated by health alone. So the other intrinsic attributes of time outdoors that we heard a little bit about when I was asking you, adventure, learning a new skill, critical thinking, leadership, exploration, meeting new people, the physical challenge, these also have to be primary selling points. The good news right, is that it means that we've got the potential to be, you have the potential to be, if you're not already there, the coolest folks on your campus and community. Regardless of your budgets, you have to operate from a position of strength. You can't always operate from the back foot, and I know that's tough in an economic climate that is telling you that what you're doing is lavish and not necessary. The better news from operating from that position of strength is that you are in a position of privilege. And in that position of privilege, you have a responsibility to bring it to other people who do not, or who cannot, or who have not accessed the outdoors ever before. Some of this may get a little repetitive today, but I want to be able to leave you with things you can do every day when you go home that don't necessarily require a lot of extra money or even a lot of extra programming resources from what the awesomeness is that you already have on hand. So I'm going to try and focus on 4 critical points that I think you can all get done when you go home, if not starting that here this week, that are going to create a more inclusive, a more open, and a more welcoming home for when you open your doors. Because the thing is, you can't just present to other people. You have to evangelize what you do. In no particular order, the 4 things that we're going to talk about. Number 1, end bro culture. In other drafts of this discussion, I had this down as bro culture must die. And I was also talking this morning about how I kind of wanted to do a Henry Rollins spoken word about this, but if you've ever been to a Henry Rollins show, you'll see the most awkward group of people in black t-shirts ever, all desperately wanting to talk to each other, but too afraid. Second, we've got to end the hierarchy of experience. Third, start thinking about a more selective use of plaid. And number 4, we've already covered, but we'll talk about a little bit more. Everyone, every day, is an adaptive athlete. Now, it's pretty easy to pan bro culture. Oops. We're missing the bro culture slide.
Can you leave that one up so we can write it down?
Yeah. It's easy to pan bro culture. And a lot of the bros out there really aren't bad people. Many have big hearts. And I myself, from time to time, have dipped into, maybe even fully cannonballed into, the bro culture. Unfortunately, and we're not going to spend too much time defining bro culture today because I think we all in our own minds have an idea of what that means, and with the cheering it seemed like we all had a pretty good universal understanding of it. But unfortunately, as a whole, we've got an industry, we've got a space, we've got a movement, we've got a collection of people that is almost entirely dominated by dudes. Specifically, dudes who look a lot like me. They're white, they wear a lot of plaid, they didn't necessarily have to fight for, and oftentimes were handed the privilege of just being really awesome outdoors. They never had to train, they just were that good. And we kind of continue to perpetuate the idea that you're really only welcome in certain outdoor pursuits if you've already reached a certain level of awesomeness. Some activities may have this more than others. I myself am not much of a birder, but I've never seen birding and energy drink commercials matched up. So I'm going to step out on a limb here and say there's not a lot of bro culture in birding. But other sports, skiing, snowboarding, climbing, and paddle sports, even backpacking, definitely have a lot of the bro culture. Now, I think we can take some comfort in the understanding that we're not #Gamergate, but let's not congratulate ourselves too much. Getting rid of bro culture starts with you. But a few disturbing things to note is that it wasn't until this year, 2014, that the first all-women ski film was made by Unicorn Picnic with Pretty Faces, right? And here's the thing. Unicorn Picnic couldn't find corporate sponsors. This was entirely crowdfunded. So the change starts from the ground up, and the sponsors are then going to pay attention. You have an opportunity to impact the next generation of consumers on a daily basis. So how are you going to generate that? The overhyped macho image I really believe in the outdoors, also creates significant barriers of entry for young women and girls. And because people don't oftentimes do Google searches on me, which is great, and if you ever do one, my last name is B-A-R-E, so you can imagine what kind of things Stacy Bear pops up. But just like last night when I talked to whenever I check into a hotel and they're like, you can't check in for your wife, which is always really fun. And I kind of have to explain to them that I am Stacy Bear. I get a lot of emails from women veterans and young women trying to get into the outdoors, asking for help and support, and it's always an awkward email response. But I've been able to see, and people are incredibly honest and open about their challenges in a given environment, and I get to see a lot of that. And where I do think there's a lot of work tearing down the walls, you've got to make sure that you're not perpetuating in some way the the Mountain Dew swilling 360 nug tail grabbers as the only people that can come to your programs. Everybody's got to feel safe there. And I haven't had a ton of challenges looking back, breaking into the outdoor industry and into this field of work. But at the time, it seemed really hard to find my place in the outdoor industry. I don't have a background in Outward Bound or Knowles. I didn't go to college. I didn't have a really rich college outdoor experience. And I'm a 6'7", 230-pound straight white guy. I've got as much privilege as you can get. And I felt that it was really hard for me to find a place here. And I was not born awesome. You'll probably see me attempting to walk later today and wonder how it is that I ski or climb. Last year, I felt Brodom up close and personal in the backcountry. I was verbally assaulted for stealing a line that I evidently shouldn't have been on because I fell twice coming down a big mountain and a really big line. And I get it, right? I mean, those guys, they own the mountain. They got up later than my partner and I on a powder day. They didn't skin as fast or as smart or as committed a track. Committed a track means stupid and straight up, just for those of you that don't ski. And so yeah, they didn't get to the top of the mountain before we did to get face shots. So I can understand that these guys who've never fallen before in challenging terrain had some legitimate concerns with me. What really concerns me and what concerned me about this environment, and once those guys kind of got up close to me, they backed down. I don't know why. They certainly didn't know my name was Stacy. But what I'm really concerned about is that bro culture leads to really violent localism and sexism and misogyny and creates really uncomfortable places for people. And I think you got to always respect the locals, but not everybody was born on the North Shore of Hawaii with a surfboard stuck on their feet. And nor will everyone always have had the opportunity to climb a 14er before they go to college, afford a National Outdoor Leadership School course, or spend the summers as Outward Bound instructors or raft guides. That doesn't mean that those people aren't any less deserving of being participants and ultimately leaders in your program. And that brings me to my next point, which is that we absolutely have to end the hierarchy of outdoor experiences. So I'm going to take you back to Iraq, 2006 and 2007. I read a lot of mountaineering books and surf books to while away my time when I wasn't trying to figure out American foreign policy and give my mind something to dream about. Now, Baghdad's a beautiful city, and the Iraqi people are truly, truly wonderful people. And I had planned a ski trip to go back in January and ski Kurdistan, which because of ISIS isn't happening, but I'm really hopeful that at some point it will happen. You can imagine that conversation with sponsors when ISIS happened about what they were willing to put their logo on. Hashtag never stop exploring. So I decided that when I came home, I would spend a couple weeks surfing in South Africa. I'm about 300 pounds in this picture. What you don't see is the picture where the wetsuit came down and didn't quite peel off all the way, and my buddy and surf guide at the time told me that I probably needed to stop eating like I was in Baghdad, and that 300 pounds was not an attractive weight for a man in a wetsuit at my height. Now, there are a lot of great stories about this trip, and there's also some really, really dark stories about this trip. This is actually where I started my cocaine addiction. or kind of continued my cocaine addiction in many ways in South Africa on a surf trip. But I'm going to focus on a rainy morning just west of Cape Francis. If you've ever surfed South Africa, it's incredible. There were pretty solid 3 to 4 all the way to 6 and even a few 7-foot swells that day. It was a crazy day having that much variability in the waves. It was a real washing machine type of day. It was raining. It was my 3rd day of surfing. My guide was hungover and passed out somewhere. He had missed the finance meeting that morning. So I got up, I paddled out into the rain, and it was an empty beach. I was there on the off season. And over the course of about the next 90 minutes, I got my ass kicked in the waves. And about halfway through this session, I see these other oaks come up, and they're huge, and they're surfing the bay that I was in. There's a bay break, and then a little further out, there's a reef break. So there are these waves coming in, and then in the middle, they crash and collide. And they kept eyeing me, and I was really worried that I was on their wave, that I was where they wanted to be. So towards the end of the abuse, I floated into the beach. I drug myself up out of the water and went looking for my surfboard. These guys come over, and I was pretty scared. They were my size, easily, if not bigger. And rather than beat the crap out of me, the guys were so stoked at that I just didn't give up in the waves. And they gave me a lot of verbal encouragement and a few pointers. They'd seen me suffer, but they'd also seen me keep fighting for it. And they appreciated that I kept on trying. These are the guys who taught me that everyone has to do something for the first time at least once. So they were so fired up when we got to talking about my story about dreaming of South Africa when I was in Iraq. And at this point, I also should note that I was a toddler in Botswana. I've worked as an adult in Angola, and that I have some close friends and family in South Africa. So traveling to South Africa wasn't too far out of my comfort zone. But surfing was, and these guys encouraged me to keep on surfing, which actually had become a challenge because by the time we found my surfboard, it was in 2 pieces. But it's a powerful lesson, I think, to remember. Me having a crappy day surfing was no better or worse than they having yet another great day in the waves. Maybe my achievement was better that day. It was a pretty challenging wave on day 3 of my surfing career, and I was 28 years old. Maybe it was a bigger day than day 3,000 for these same guys who'd been surfing since they were 4. But it's not just about comparing experts to beginners and breaking down the hierarchy. Now, I think all of us have our own ideas of what sport is better than the other and how that sport can change the lives of whoever participates more than the other. But the truth is, very rarely anyway, is our job to promote a specific kind of activity in the outdoors as much as we're trying to promote the outdoors themselves and create numerous pathways for people to get there. I'm a skier and I'm a climber. That's how I like to define myself. It doesn't mean my experiences are somehow better or more important than a kayaker or a rafter. If kayaks were bigger, though there are times I really question the wisdom about carrying everything up in a pack as opposed to putting it all in a boat and going down a river. 4 years ago, the Sierra Club Military Outdoors program had a grants program, and we gave funding out to other groups that were getting people and veterans outdoors. And I was on the phone with a fellow who told me that if I spent money on anything other than fly fishing with veterans, I was wasting my time. He told me that the benefits of time outdoors were maximized in fly fishing, and that everything else was just leading up to fly fishing, so just start there. Now, I appreciated his passion. He just opened up a shop here in Portland called Soul River, so I encourage you to check it out. He's a great guy. We've become really good friends, and I've always appreciated throwing flies after a long day climbing, but I couldn't support the notion that what he was doing was somehow better than what others were doing. And I think both in experience and in activity, we oftentimes end up intimidating rather than inspiring people to go outdoors, and without even realizing it, we reinforce the negative image of bro culture. If you get somebody out on a walk around campus, or if you take them skiing in the Chugach, if you look at time outdoors as a consumptive and oftentimes a competitive activity, the Chugach might win. But what we need to be doing is looking at the outdoors as a relationship activity, an activity where we can learn from and reflect on our own life lessons, where we can get to know nature and one another. And if you think about it that way, both events are equal. So what's the point of your programming? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Personally, I hope it's about introducing nature to people and helping them to humble themselves before the natural environment. Now, I'm not saying that skiing in the Chugach isn't a worthy goal, or that it doesn't require an entirely different set of inputs, skills, and experiences to make happen versus a walk around campus. Only the two, as it relates to our ability to humble ourselves before nature and feel the benefits of the outdoors, can be equal. And they can be equal for different people. Ending the hierarchy of experience needs to be in your written job description. For those of you that take brand slogans like the North Face's Never Stop Exploring or Suunto's Conquer New Territory, seriously remember that most people on your campus and your community have probably never explored the trails or hills or woods or rivers or mountains or prairie next door to your campus. So for them, that is a new area to explore. And the mind space to go out and do it, it's territory they probably haven't begun to conquer in their own minds. So in creating the different levels of engagement and then assigning value to them, what we've ended up doing is manifesting it in the outdoor industry to create a real diversity issue, not just with outdoor brands, but other people recognize that this is a problem. The Department of Interior and organizations like the Sierra Club, we all recognize that not enough people of color, not enough women, and not enough people who might identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer are getting in the outdoors, and they're not buying the product. Whether those products are cause-based, like the Sierra Club and conservation, whether it's land-based, like the Department of Interior, whether it's experience-based, like what you're doing, whether it's material-based, like the brands, there's a fear, and I think it's real, that if we don't attract a customer base, a membership base or a user base that is more reflective of the total demographic breakdown of America, we're going to lose. We're going to lose relevance, then we're going to lose the lands, then we're going to lose the experience entirely. You've got to be thinking about this back at your campuses. You can't expect or assume somebody else is going to be doing it. And it's a real problem. So real, in fact, we have failed so greatly at our jobs that organizations like Outdoor Afro, Girl Trek, and Latino Outdoors have had to stand up. Now, these are fantastic organizations, but why is it that they have to exist? They're doing incredible work. They're connecting communities outdoors because they couldn't find a welcoming home in our programs and in other locations. In 1995, James Edward Mills, who just published a book called The Adventure Gap, where he's analyzing the absence of people of color from high adventure, started a company called Nubian Ice, which was to be an Afrocentric ski clothing brand. But he couldn't get investors behind him. One of the things that I'm really challenged with, however, is whether or not this problem is actually real. Does it really represent a dearth of people of color and different experiences in the outdoors? Or is it differences in how people of color participate outside and where? We know statistically that visitors to national parks, national forests, even state parks are typically overwhelmingly white. But the San Gabriel Monument, now in Los Angeles, and the Desert and Oregon Peaks of southeast New Mexico, two of our nation's newest monuments, would not have been designated without strong Latino support. But what about those state lands? What about city and county parks? What about picnickers? What about hikers? What about fishermen? What about the rainbow of people that's already outdoors, but they're not wearing puffy jackets, they're wearing jeans, they're wearing cotton t-shirts, they're wearing LA Gear kicks? What about them? Just because they're not wearing our identifiable brands, do we see them as belonging as part of our tribe? And I think the answer right now is overwhelmingly no. We don't. So I don't even know if we see everyone who is already outdoors. So when we think about the hierarchy of experience, we've also got to be thinking about diversity and privilege. We've got to think about inclusivity in the outdoors. And we absolutely must have a conversation about race, because we want our national parks, not just our state parks and our county parks, but our national parks and our national forests to be safe spaces for everybody, And that means we've got to have, and you've got to have, conversations about image and ideology when people get outdoors. And this brings me to my next point. Wear plaid selectively. I love plaid. I'm bearded. Part of it is because I have nothing else up here. I wear trucker hats. I wear the North Face, Keen shoes. I've got a Suunto watch. And pretty much any day of the year, I can wax eloquently about snow conditions in at least 4 different time zones. I'm the targeted goal. I'm the outdoor dream of the outdoor industry, and I am also, at times, part of the problem. A lot of people don't grow up in communities where plaid is cool, and a lot of people may see plaid as that visual point for what we've talked about in the bro culture. And it doesn't mean that we've got to eliminate everything that bro culture has taken for its own. There's nothing inherently wrong with plaid, unless you're an Englishman in the 18th century concerned about Scottish independence, but it means, what it does mean is that we've got to encourage a broad, diverse range of people, again, not just with different skin colors, but with different experiences and thoughts about how they want to experience nature. A lot of you may not know that Republicans also enjoy time outdoors, for example. We may want to ensure, we've got to ensure that individuals don't have to give up who they are to come be a part of what we do. Amen. And since we're the ones with the positions of strength, we have got to be willing to engage and be the ones open to change. We have to start the engagement process. We can't leave it up to the community. Well, they don't want to get outdoors. That's not an excuse. That means being open to folks who maybe have nothing in common with you when you first look out at it. Your student leaders and your employees, you have to be reaching out to the jocks, the burnouts, right? I mean, the rest of the community thinks that the burnouts are the skiers and the climbers. Do you guys remember the meme that went around last year about the homeless guy in church who nobody wanted to talk to? And I looked at that and I was like, I know that guy, right? It's the fancy set, it's the preps, it's the goth kids, the confused suburbanites, the baggy panted poets, the musicians, the student government kids, the overachievers, the underachievers, the frat kids, the sorority kids, the kids that quit the frats, the dropouts. All of them need to be feeling welcome in your programs. Because the thing about the outdoors is trees, mountains, rocks, waves don't care who you are. Your gender, your race, your religion, your sexual preference, your veteran status, none of that matters to the trees. The rocks don't care, and that's what makes what you do and what we do so powerful and so wonderful. This huge, challenging, messy idea of equality and American democracy starts on our public lands, and it starts with you. You're the ones who can take what divides us inside, and when you get outdoors, none of that matters. It's utterly useless, your social and your class, when you're hiking and when you're figuring out how to team up to hike through the desert. That's the power that you have. So 2 months ago, I'm picking up a group of veterans from the airport. Feeling pretty cool about myself as I'm standing there. I'm on the North Face team. I'm a National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. We're getting ready to go to the Dinosaur National Monument for 9/11. People come up to me and they say to me, dude, your beard's not big enough. Where's your flannel shirt? Because they assume that since I worked for the Sierra Club, I would fit, this kind of larger lumberjack stereotype. And I only had one of the 3 things they were looking for. I had my trucker hat on, I didn't have a big enough beard, and I didn't have a ratty flannel. Later on, they were surprised that I was even a veteran, which in a way means that I was winning, because I wasn't using that as my only identity. Brands have started to notice, and some are starting to sell color block shirts and not just plaids. But there are other brands popping up, and sometimes I struggle as to whether or not these brands are helping or hurting with the bro culture. But if you've ever met the guys and gals behind the Vertica brand, their website sometimes scares me a little bit, but they're really passionate about reaching out to a group of folks who really love baggy clothes, and that's what they want to do. And it's a great, great brand from that standpoint. It's an urban look. It's a baggier look. There's other folks, Scott McGuire from the Mountain Lab, who just launched the Venture Out Retail Showcase at the Outdoor Retail Show, designed to highlight a modern outdoors look with brands that range more to lifestyle as opposed to the hardcore outdoors woman or man. And you know, when you come home from work and you want to throw on a plaid shirt, or you're heading out to the river on a private trip, dress like you want. But when you're at work, when you're on campuses, make sure that how you look isn't a barrier to others. And on that, one last point about diversity in the outdoors. And I've said this before, but I think it really needs repeating. Too often, we want people who look different than us to show up. What we need is people who think different to show up. What the outdoor world looks like in 5 years, we don't know because it hasn't been created yet. We've got to make sure that there are new people at the table creating. And when I talk about this room needs to look different, I don't mean that you need to give up your seat at the table. I mean that this room needs to be twice as big. And I think that's one of the real challenges to think about, is that new mindset. What does that look like? And it's that every day, everyone really is an adaptive athlete. This is me stuck in a crack in Joshua Tree because I cannot buy traditional climbing shoes, meaning I'm stuck in sports slippers that go up to a size 13 for my size 15 to jam into, and I have massive, what I like to call knuckle drag, which is really challenging in cracks like this. So this is about moments before I unblocked myself, and the reason that I was actually following here and not top roping is because earlier on that climb, a similar foot stuck in a crack, I had to jam myself and literally jump out of the crack. And if you're 230 pounds jumping out of a crack, I don't care how well your #1 cam is placed, it's not going to hold. The last 13 years of war in this country have led to a rise in the public face of what people term adaptive athletics. There's increasing opportunities for people who have lost all or part of a limb, or at least its functionality, who have lost eyesight or another sense, to get outdoors. And so these adaptive programs are on the rise, and this is a really good thing. And I think spurred on by the nearly ubiquitous Wounded Warrior Project, we've also begun to recognize that wounds aren't just physical, but mental as well. These include things like traumatic brain injury, which is part of the reason that I have notes, post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma, and lesser-known issues like adjustment disorder, and of course a rash of things that can either be the root cause or a symptom of many of these things like depression, suicidal tendencies, alcoholism, and addiction. And I've ticked all of those off in my lifetime. Many of these issues in veterans and in communities in general oftentimes go largely unreported, and the people who struggle with them do not always identify as struggling with them. When I was a cocaine addict, I would not describe myself as somebody who was a cocaine addict or who had post-traumatic stress disorder. Looking back, with each passing year from my return, I can clearly point to episodes of adjustment disorder or PTSD and how that manifested itself in my addiction and alcoholism. Like I said, I would never have copped up to any of those issues. Even the VA, the Veterans Affairs Hospital, agreed with me, diagnosing me with both a post-traumatic stress disorder and a likely traumatic brain injury, but they then claimed I got it from somewhere other than my year in combat. I did graduate from the University of Mississippi, and I'm a loyal Ole Miss football fan, and that can be a painful process. However, as Jeanette can tell you, it's not near as bad as being a Michigan fan. There is a hierarchy in the University of M. So the issue with mental health is that the conversation in many ways that got me into this room speaking to you all, and so you can blame Jeanette if you're frustrated with my talk today, is we first started talking about what it meant to be a program that could create a safe space and was reaching out first to the increasing number of student veterans on our campuses. But what we realized is it was a larger issue of inclusivity. Now, I know a lot of people have been hesitant to open up about the idea of veteran programming, concerned, and I think rightfully so, about what having veterans and people with severe mental or even polytrauma issues means on your campus. And certainly popular portrayal of veterans in our media culture today seems to be focused only on those of us who really go crazy. And it's kind of frightening if you don't know much about it. You've only got a limited number of resources, so why spend those on reaching out to people you may not even know exist on your campus and who you may not even be prepared to serve if and when they come through the door? You've got to have priorities, and I get that. Here's the thing. you are already serving students and community members with a whole host of mental health issues. And statistically, the veterans you do serve won't have or won't identify with any sort of the issues I've just mentioned. It's also likely you're serving someone with some level of physical disability already, even if you haven't seen it, maybe even a polytrauma, an eye, or a hearing issue, because the world we live in today means that there are huge numbers of people living with PTSD, or if it's not military sexual trauma, it's sexual trauma. So I want to go over a few numbers with you. 60% of men and 50% of women experience at least one trauma in their lives that's reported. I think these numbers are actually low. Sexual assault, physical assault, combat, you witness death, and typically 7 to 8% of all Americans will have PTSD at some point in their lives. What that means is the American Psychological Association recognizes that you can actually recover from post-traumatic stress disorder. So what that translates out to is 5.2 million people each year in America living with PTSD. It's a lot higher than, there's a lot higher numbers if you're just dealing with any trauma in general, right? Those numbers then go way up. Now, as veterans with Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, it's estimated that about 10 to 20% of OIF and OAF veterans who served have PTSD. Again, I think this is low, and it also doesn't look at things like adjustment disorder, general depression, or even a military sexual trauma. But still, even if you add in a higher number, those numbers are probably going to be less than half of the total veteran population. Keep in mind also that out of the 2.5 million who served during Iraq and Afghanistan, only 60% of the United States military deployed. Now, in Vietnam veterans, this goes as high as 30%. For Gulf War I veterans, it's about 12%. That doesn't mean that others aren't struggling to readjust home from war. That's a real issue. It just means that these are the numbers we know about post-traumatic stress disorder. So, assuming 20% of all OIF and OEF veterans have PTSD, that's 500,000 veterans. With more than 5 million non-veterans having post-traumatic stress disorder, it means that you outnumber us 5 to 1. So, now that I know there's at least a second veteran in the audience, because I can see Josh that he walked in. So that's the guy in the red plaid that you want to talk to about Georgetown University and Project Cohort. For those of you that are Portland Timbers fans, he's also a Seattle Sounders fan, if you want to talk to him about that. So knowing that there's at least 2 veterans in this room, and I'm guessing that there's probably several more, what it means is that at least 10 of you statistically have post-traumatic stress disorder. So what are you worried about? Even if 100% of my generation of veterans had post-traumatic stress disorder, the rest of you still outnumber us 2 to 1 with post-traumatic stress disorder. So what does that mean? There's at least 2 of you in this room that most likely have post-traumatic stress disorder or a mental health injury, and there's nothing wrong with that. So in some way, you should be screening for and preparing for mental and emotional health issues, just like you would screen for and prepare for physical health issues. Because like we've already discussed, you're part of the healing process. You're a public health worker. You have a responsibility. You've got to be ready. And when you do that, you're going to be increasing your level of service and risk management across the board for everybody. Real briefly, to touch on polytrauma, people freak out oftentimes when they see somebody in a wheelchair with a prosthetic. A good buddy of mine, Chris Fesmeyer, is an above-the-knee double amputee. He's one of the best skiers I know. We've skied all across Colorado and Utah. It's always weird to me when we're hanging out, ski mountain or a restaurant, people walk up to him and speak to him like this: "How are you?" He responds, "Fine, I'm missing my legs. Do you have a problem?" Just because you're missing your legs doesn't mean you can't understand English. The same thing is true with the statistics around PTSD when it comes to polytrauma between veterans and the non-veteran community. In fact, the percentages are it's drastically higher. Even with war, there are more non-veterans losing limbs, losing vision, and losing their hearing than they are in the military community. 2010, 9 years into the wars, 1,621 people had lost an amputation. Any guesses about what this is on an annual basis in the United States? Anyone? 185,000 people in America lose a limb every single year. So what's important to remember is that the circumstances for how people lose limbs, war on the one hand, versus peripheral vascular trauma and diabetes, the leading causes of amputation in the non-military population, have very different inputs for why someone might want to participate in your programs. They're also going to have a very different set of outcomes in the outdoors that they might be looking for. But the fact that people have trauma and missing limbs or mental health injuries means that these individuals, regardless of how it happened, are not alone and are likely not the only people on your campus dealing with these issues. You've got to be ready. And it's rarely as scary as it might seem at first. Yes, I get that adaptive gear can cost money, but I would suggest to you then is to make sure you have a good relationship with your closest adaptive focus program near you, especially for physical challenges. And from there, you can bring in program graduates. One of the failings of a lot of adaptive sports programs is people just wait for that annual ski program or that annual rafting program. But once they've learned those skills, they should be able to come into your programs and keep working if you can't help them teach the skills in the first place. So I'm not asking you to be ready to teach those skills, but what I'm asking you is to be ready to try. The best ski trip I have ever been on was an adaptive backcountry ski trip to Telluride a couple of years ago. Since then, we've actually had a really big challenge continuing to fundraise for this trip because few people see the need to get people in bucket skis out into the backcountry. Why not just use a lift? But who are we to tell other people who gets to have fresh tracks and who doesn't? Who cares if it takes all afternoon to get somebody 800 feet of vertical, fresh tracks? It's a beautiful thing. So don't be in the business of deciding who gets to be on your programs. Obviously, they have to have the right set of skills and training, but it doesn't mean that they can't start working up from that walk around your campus to the ski trip and the Chugach. Now, I'm not arguing that this is easy. I fail every day to incorporate these 4 points, these 4 broad pillars into my programming and AORE programming, but we try. It's an evolving process. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of talking to your participants and letting them know that you might fail together with them. We've taken the position to be really brutally honest in our approach. And we've got to be open to criticism. And I mean really open to criticism. And when we get it wrong, we have to tell people we got it wrong. And that's really, really hard at times. But it goes back to the whole bro culture thing. You're not supposed to be perfect. We're always learning. There's always more that you can do. And if you want to open your doors wider, if you want to make sure that your doors stay open, you've got to get more people coming in. And you've got to get more and more people going out to spread the good word on our behalf. It's hard to measure how effective your programs are doing. Increasing numbers, increasing budgets, and increasing requests for partnerships are 3 ways you might be able to show success. But so is figuring out how to capture the anecdotes and the stories. So is making sure you have access to all the research that's out there. And we're trying, but it's not always easy to measure things like increased feeling of awe, connectivity, and empathy on your campuses. How do you measure stoke to begin with? But it's absolutely necessary for the work we do. And you've got to tell that story. And you've got to have new people telling that story on your behalf. For those of you still awake, for those of you not enmeshed in your social media feeds, you're looking at cats right now or assassinating me over Twitter, I want to thank you for making it this far with me. Not only am I an adaptive athlete, I'm an adaptive speaker. And if you take away only one thing at all, remember, please remember, and tell your administrators, what you're doing is not a nice thing. It's not a lavish expenditure. It's not an amenity. It's not just for the cool kids. What you are doing is the essential work of our time. It's not legislation. It's not litigation. It's not a quick fix. But it is absolutely and you have to believe this. If you don't believe this, pack your things, go home. This is the essential work of our time. We're creating the foundations for a more empathetic, a more understanding, a more cooperative, and a far healthier future. Going back to my southern roots, it really is time for a wilderness revival. And that's got to happen in the outdoors. My friends, my colleagues, that's got to start with each of you. So remember, the next time somebody asks you what you do, just tell them you're a superhero. So don't forget the finance meeting is Friday at 7:30. We do, that was awesome. I really appreciate that. Tears in my eyes. I know it's kind of awkward, but we did want to set some time aside for questions if people have questions, like why Josh was late and stuff, or anything else. Any questions? Yeah. Getting wounded warriors and veterans to commit to programming. We were talking about this earlier. There is a challenge in the veteran community. Jeanette asked me yesterday if I was really busy with Veterans Day work, and Veterans Day for a lot of folks, it's a very difficult holiday for a number of reasons. I think when we're talking specifically about veterans, for me, and this is just my opinion, and there's other people who can disagree with me. First of all, if you are a veteran or serving, can you raise your hand just so we can get an idea of other veterans? All right. So what I would ask, if you are a veteran and you're comfortable, maybe actually just put that on your name tag so that if people, if you're comfortable and people can probably ask maybe some questions about it or the experience, because I don't propose to speak for all veterans. But one of the challenges I have is that our country so badly didn't want to happen to the Vietnam generation what happened to the Vietnam generation to happen to our generation of veterans. And so they did something, and that something didn't always translate into the right thing. And so I think there's sometimes been an entitlement that's been created, and so people are like, well, I don't really have to do this because there's going to be the next program down the road. So what you have to do is find a way to get service members to have, and veterans to have skin in the game. We no longer do 100% free trips. If somebody can't pay for it financially, we find other ways to make sure that they're engaged in the trip. But we do our best not to have 100% free trips because it's that. So that's part of it, I think. It's also making sure that you're training leadership and engaging people in leadership skills. And then I think it's also making sure that you have an alcohol and drug-free program as well. Those are things that I think can go really, really wrong. Like rafting trips, a lot of times people associate a rafting trip with alcohol, and that might be a challenge, or creating that safe space. So that's a part of it. But you've got to have people have to have skin in the game. All right, we'll leave it on that awkward note then if there's no other question. All right, you guys were wonderful. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. I'll be around today and a little bit tomorrow, and Josh from the Sierra Club and Tony Rango from National Outings. We'd love to have you all involved in our programming.